So I wanted to put together something fairly easy because it's a light evening and we had the whole day of HRS already. So the biophysics of PFA is the light topic that we can discuss. These are my disclosures. And the one at the very bottom, that's the most relevant one. So he believes in electroporation, and I believe in that for more than 30 years. So that's my real disclosure. Yeah. Now, I think it's fair to go to the cell because that's the target. So the target that we actually address with the high voltage pulses is the membrane of the cell. The membrane is there to separate the inside from the outside, and it's controlling the transport of all molecules and ions, with of course the proteins, the channels, and with the endo and exocytosis. From the electrical point of view, because I'm an electrical engineer by background, it's a very poor conductor, or you could even consider it as a capacitor. Now, as such, when you put it in the electric field, that is, when you deliver the electric pulses, it actually charges. Now, it charges, for example, to 500 millivolts. Now, 500 millivolts across the distance of a 5 nanometers represents a 100 megavolts per meter. If you look at the credible, sources on the internet, like Wikipedia, you can read that the spark will go off through the air at much less, 3 megavolts per meter. So that's, that is what the cell is subjected to, the membrane. And of course, no wonder the water is pushed in, the water molecules are pushed in, and so we got these water filled pores. With water, of course, the ions go through, the reactive oxygen species, and this creates now a chemical reactions, a peroxidation of the lipids. And of course, we can also say that there's damage to the membrane proteins, and all of that increases the transport of molecules. Now, we see the exchange of molecules that otherwise are tightly controlled. That includes the sodium, potassium, and of course, the calcium and the dump molecules. That leads to further events. And eventually, the membrane tries to be repaired. The cell tries to repair the membrane by exocytosis, patching, clogging, and reassembling the cytoskeleton, recovering the protein function with, of course, also with the expression of the heat choke proteins as chaperones for the folding of the proteins. If the cell reestablishes the homeostasis, it will survive. If not, the cell will die. So that's the basics, and that's the underlying mechanism of the pulsed field ablation, the technology that we are also, enthusiastic about in the last couple of years. Note the time scale. It goes from nano to microseconds. That is during the pulses, immediately after the pulses, but it can extend to hours until we see the final results. Hence, the mapping is kind of lost, so for the time being, yeah. And the other thing that I want to go is a little bit up, so now on the tissue level, because cells will eventually form a tissue, and quite often you will be explained that we are going to do the irreversible electroporation, or we're going to do the reversible electroporation, and so on. That's not really what happens. What really happens is, because the field is very inhomogeneous in the tissue, and here's an example, you will have eventually all of this happening. So if we go far away from the catheter, nothing's going to happen. If we are very close to the catheter, we're going to see thermal damage. And in between, we're going to see, cells trying to decide, am I going to survive or am I going to die? Yeah. And eventually, that's what we are faced with. So all the existing PFA technologies and systems were basically developed for the pulmonary vein isolation. That's, I believe the expression is the low-hanging fruit, but also a very big market. Atria have very thin wall. So the target is very low, I would say. We want to go deeper. Okay, so what can we do? So there are many papers which try to convince us that what we do is basically we apply more. Well, what can we change? Well, basically the number of trains. There's nothing else that we can change, basically. So from 1 to 4, it increases. And then from 12 bursts to 18 to 24, and increasing the number of PFA bursts pulses significantly increases lesion depth. Well, if you look really at the numbers, so from 3.7 to 4.2, 4.7 to 6.3 millimeters, this is really not significant increase. And the authors actually admit that in their paper. So we end up with a couple of millimeters, so 6, 7 millimeters at best, lesion depth. Then some argue we can use the monophasic, and that will bring a lot of depth. And there was a recent paper where they actually compared the same waveform, monophasic, biphasic. Again, the increase is from, let me say, 5 to 6 millimeter. So drastic increase? Not really. And then they compare what all the others have done. And we're going to come back to this. It's just a paragraph from their discussion. We published on December 30 a paper where we did the ventricular ablation. And we were limited by the technology. And so we used a non-optimized catheter and a non-optimized waveform. So the only thing what we could do is we could change the voltage, which is a lot. Many people can't do that. And we did deliver a number of pulses. And of course, we also looked at the lesion size, both by cardiac MRI, but also on the gross pathology and histology. And these are basically the results. And first of all, depending on when we look, cardiac MRI, 24 hours, 7 days, or 6 weeks, we get a little bit different results. That's not the point that I want to make. We've changed the voltage from 1,000 to 1,300, 1,500, and we saw a little bit of increase in volume, in the size of the lesion. But then we were limited. So the only thing we could do next is actually deliver 1, 4, 8, and 16. So that's much bigger variations than anybody else has done before. The reason why we want to do that is actually to show that you do not indefinitely increase. So from 1 to 4, it's 4 times. From 4 to 8 is 2 times. From 8 to 16, 2 times. Do you see 4 times, 2 times, 16 times increased? No. Okay, so there's a saturation point. To put it in your perspective, which is the millimeter depth, this is what you see. And I put the red line, which is a guide to your eyes. You see, it saturates it. We can't go further. So what we achieved is, let me say, 8 millimeters depth, plus minus, obviously. The others, 7.1, 8.8, 6.5, and 5.3. So clearly, there's a need for something more. There's a need for, maybe a PFA system 2.0, yeah? There's another thing with the PFA which I think is important to stress. And I think this has been shown by the others, but it's also supported here just by looking at both the model on one side and the histology on the other side. It tells us that the scar, because of the myocardial infarction, does not really represent such a terrible barrier for the ablation. So scar homogenization is maybe achievable with PFA more than with the thermal energies. And with this, of course, the basics, the light part of the evening is over. Thank you. This is the data, and we can't forget this. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Damijan. That was very insightful, and thank you for all the effort there.